if you've been with me since day one, if you have been following me on the social media, you guys know that a lot of times I'll get sent some bottles, I'll try them, I'll give you my thoughts, whether they're good thoughts or bad thoughts, and we go from there. And sometimes the stars align, just so, and I go pick up a bottle that I've either heard about or seen or just been curious about, and it is just great. And that is precisely what happened to me with Redwood Empire's Pipe Dream. So I bought the bottle, I gave it a taste, I really liked it. Did one of my 30-second reviews on it, which you might have seen if you follow me on TikTok or Instagram. And sure enough, Redwood Empire actually reached out and they wanted to do an interview or at least collaborate in some way. And I said, absolutely, I would love to have you guys on the podcast. And so today, that's exactly what we got. We have Redwood Empire on the podcast today to discuss their different blends, how they got started, where they came from, and their lineup of whiskeys in general, as well as a little sneak peek as to where they are going later on this year. So, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation that I got to have with the minds behind the whiskey that I enjoy so much. We have Jeff Duckhorn, Master Distiller at Redwood Empire, and Lauren Patz, the Head Distiller at Redwood Empire, and we're going to have them break down their jobs, what they do, what they look for in their whiskeys, and how their process works. Let's get to that interview right now. So, today, we've got Jeff and Lauren from Redwood Empire. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Yeah, better now. We're going to taste some whiskey.
Yeah, that always makes my day better, that's for sure. I thought maybe just to get started, it would be best if you guys could just kind of run through your roles, what your job titles mean, and what you kind of do at Redwood on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So I am a master distiller here at Redwood Empire. We've been running for, we're just about to start our 9th year of production. So I've been here since day one, and now Lauren's been with us for 2 years now. Mm-hmm. And Lauren came in as head distiller, and so she's now managing all the day-to-day operations.
Okay, great. And I think I have this as a later question, but this brings up a good point is you guys do make your own distillate. Do you source any and blend any, or is it all Redwood Empire distillate?
Yes, we do both.
Okay.
We make in-house and we source.
Okay. And then, I guess that lends itself to most of, or if not all of the bottles I've tried here are blends. So you kind of put your own in there and then use blending to bring out different flavor profiles like we see sometimes with different whiskeys, right?
You've tried either of the two bottled and bonds. Those are 100% grain to glass. And then the 3 core SKUs are blends. So the Pipe Dream, the Emerald Giant, and the Lost Monarch are blends. And then the Grizzly Beast and the Rocket Top are grain to glass.
Okay, good to know. That's what I have as Grizzly Beast right here, which we will talk about for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just actually had a little bit, and I guess I already finished it.
Yeah, it's easy to drink, that's for sure, which I have some notes jotted down I wanted to run through here later on, but I enjoyed all of them. I appreciate you guys sending those. For those listening, my experience with Redwood Empire was not any Redwood Empire reaching out, asking for promotion, any of that. I just bought a bottle because I heard it was great, and I tried it, and I was like, this is really good. So I posted a review of it. It was the Pipe Dream, and then you guys reached out after seeing that review. But I really enjoyed the Pipe Dream, and I've enjoyed what I've tried so far. So it's always good when it's just authentic like that. I found it at the store, tried it, and really enjoyed it.
All the way out in Ohio, no less.
Yeah, good point. All the way across the country, yeah.
That's great. Love to hear that.
So
I find that
go ahead.
The Pipe Dream really tends to be kind of the invitation into the lineup, and then the rest is like follow through, you know what I mean? Just meeting expectations after that. But the Pipe Dream really is.
It's our gateway drug.
Yeah, it's kind of like a gateway into the rest of the SKUs that we have, for sure.
I can definitely see that. It's very welcoming. It's kind of like, that's a natural progression for a lot of whiskey drinkers is you come in with like a really nice welcoming bourbon, something on like the mid shelf, and then as you get into the higher proof, like you guys have the bottle and bond now, and ryes, which are a little bit more aggressive, and you have to get into whiskey before you can get into rye whiskey, and so which is actually kind of a theory I have about your lineup that I think we can let's talk about that now. Is that purposeful, that the gateway drug and kind of the progression that you have? We could stick with the three, I guess, originals. Is it safe to say those were your originals?
And they're all kind of our core offerings. They're our everyday on the shelf offerings.
Yes. So I did a tasting with them, and it seemed to me like it was almost a natural progression from welcoming to complex / like spicy, like what you start to favor when you're a little bit farther along in your whiskey journey. Is that intentional or what? Or am I just making that up?
I would hope so. I think there's maybe some unintentional intent there, but yeah, I mean, as distillers, we love all of our different grains. I think we tend to gravitate a little bit more towards rye because it's really challenging to make, and so when you make it pretty well, you're very excited, and it's kind of a badge of courage that we all have, and so I think we definitely gravitate more towards rye, but it's not something you can just pick up an everyday bourbon drinker and get them to appreciate it off the bat. So there is a progression. So actually, our Lost Monarch, which is our blue label of our three core products, and that's a blend of bourbon and rye. We released that under a different label initially in 2017. It was still called Redwood Empire, but it was just American whiskey. So at the time, we only released one product, one whiskey. And so that was kind of where all the intent started, was we were going to release one whiskey. Well, let's do something fun and a little bit different, but also straddles that line and kind of blurs that conversation between bourbon and rye. So it all started with that blend. And then we knew we were going to launch a bourbon and a rye, and that kind of came about in 2019. That gave us the opportunity to go back from a design and marketing standpoint and really fine tune some things. Our original packaging was fine, but it really didn't speak to where we are in the world, which is Northern California. We don't aspire to be another Kentucky or East Coast whiskey company or whatever. We're out here in California, so we want to talk about where we are in the world. And so with the new packaging launch in 19, we have the opportunity to kind of dive into that more, but also now have this bourbon and rye that kind of sit on both sides of the Lost Monarch, which kind of brings it all together.
Yeah. As a Californian distillery, I think that consumer expectations are different than if we were a distillery from Kentucky or what would be considered a more traditionally distilling state. And so we have an added layer of freedom in flavor, development, but also just in the products that we are making. And so I think all three of the core and all of our products kind of represent that freedom in being able to do something maybe slightly more outside of the box. And rye in particular, both Jeff and I are pretty passionate about as a spirit category. And as you mentioned, for the most part, a lot of people have to kind of develop that appreciation as they develop their overall appreciation for whiskey. But we've really tried to leave that door as wide open as possible. So I often talk about our Emerald Giant as being the rye whiskey for people who have been hurt by rye whiskey in the past. It's a very soft, a much gentler expression than specifically right now, stylistically, what people are doing, which tends to be a little bit on the spicier, borderline astringent end of the spectrum of what's out there. And because their rye is still a category that people are familiarizing themselves with, there's more chances to kind of put your own individual stamp on it. With bourbon, you're kind of set up to achieve a certain flavor profile and a certain texture palate-wise. But with rye, I think that the spectrum of expectation is wider, and so you can kind of play within a slightly larger set of rules there.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. People aren't just looking for or anticipating your traditional Kentucky bourbon. You can really expand, and I think you have done that with the bourbon as well, as you mentioned. Since you're not in Kentucky, you're not in your Kentuckys, your Tennessees, where people have this presumption of what it's supposed to taste like, and so It gives you the ability to really play with it. And I think that's expressed really well through your lineup, which we will be talking about here shortly. So One question that I really like to ask anybody that I have on the show is, where did your whiskey journey begin? What really brought you to actually, being a distiller? For a lot of folks, it's what brings you into collecting bottles of whiskey. But what brought you into the hobby to the point of actually being a distiller, and maybe even to the specific niche that you mentioned of really focusing in on rye?
Well, I was never a hobbyist. I grew up in the Napa Valley, and my parents had a winery that I kind of grew up considering to be like my other sibling. So that was a big part of my childhood. So spirit or not necessarily spirit, but food and wine industry was a large part of my growth, but I never actually considered ever going into wine. I never really thought of that as like a plan. And after a few other jobs and things like that, I ended up working at a chocolate factory. And my role there was to do pairings of chocolate and beer, wine, cheese, and of course, spirits as well. And that's really where I developed a true love and appreciation for spirits. And I started working at another distillery that's about 10 minutes down the road from here. And I was their head distiller for 7 years before coming onto the team here. So that's so I always say I got to whiskey via chocolate.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask 10 craft distillers where they started out in the world, you're going to get 10 radically different stories. It's a very interesting industry where, Lauren was talking about wine. I mean, wine now, especially out here, there's a lot of education available. There's a lot of programs, locally here. There's some really good universities for winemaking, enology, vineyard, lots of different facets you can go into. For us distillers, I mean, it's still kind of the Wild West. It's a pretty new atmosphere. There really isn't a lot of formal education available. So for most of us, it's really like kind of that wandering path where we're coming from somewhere else. Myself personally, I've been with our parent company, which is Purple Brands, and we are a wine and spirits company. Of course, being based in Sonoma County, kind of heart of the other West Coast wine region. We have a big wine portfolio. And I started with the company as a cost accountant. So counting the beans, spreadsheets, all that fun stuff. About as far from whiskey as you could be, other than wanting to drink whiskey at the end of the day after staring at spreadsheets all day. But so we've all kind of come to it from a different place. So that's what's I think really fun about this industry is that you get a lot of creativity and a lot of different viewpoints that come together, and ultimately make some really fun stuff.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and I've mentioned this repeatedly on my social media, that's one of the best parts of the whiskey industry, the whiskey hobby, whatever you want to call it, is the diverse background that brings all these different people to the same place, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, you never are able to guess the story of what brought them to whiskey. You might just assume it's like, oh, I used to drink it in college with Coke, and eventually I wanted it without the Coke. That happens sometimes. But one of you through chocolate, and one of you through accounting, I believe it was. I'm interested in the story of accounting to distilling.
Yeah. So I've been with the company now 13 years, and our owner has been very successful in the wine world and built up some very well-known brands out here. And he sold his last wine brand in 2012, Mark West, very big Pinot Noir brand. And his name Derek Benham. He's always had a nose for up-and-coming trends, and so he hit Merlot when it was hot in the 90s, and then Pinot in the 2000s, and then he wanted to do something else. So he wanted to continue with wine, and we have a great stable of up-and-coming wine brands. But he also wanted to kind of like get out there a little bit and try something different. And so that's where he started hearing about spirits and got the idea to build a distillery here in our winery. So we're a very large production facility now, wine and spirits. And so that was, 2012 was the time I was doing the accounting, but I kind of heard this talk of like, hey, we're going to put a distillery in. And so I was like, I need to be part of that. Like I was, accounting's fine, don't get me wrong. I went to school for that. I do love numbers. I love a good pivot table and spreadsheets and all that good stuff. But personally, I like to make stuff. That's what I do when I go home at night. And I've always had a creative, desire and need to be out. And whether it's in the dirt, growing stuff, or home brewing, which I've been doing for many, many years, or or playing with different fermentations, whether it's bread based or kombucha or whatever. So I really like this opportunity kind of started being talked about, and I insinuated myself into the conversation gently, and then more drastically, and then kind of through just happy circumstances. By the time we got operational in 15, I was day one distiller. So it's it's kind of how life works out sometimes, and yeah, opportunities present themselves, and right place, right time, and you take advantage of it. So I can't believe it's been over 8 years, or almost 8 years now, that we've been doing it, but it's pretty wild. So it's been great.
Yeah. People often ask, like, how do you become a distiller? And it doesn't really matter what company you're working for, or if you're starting your own. The plan is always to make yourself invaluable to the overall success of the brand and the spirit itself. And Jeff certainly has done that here. And I felt like that was kind of like how I found my own success as well, is like whatever needs doing, doing it the best you can possibly do, and just like really going out there, taking initiative. Also, cleaning is a big one.
Yeah. There's a lot of unglamorous things about the industry that don't get talked about. I mean, you have to be very well organized.
Yeah.
You can make the most amazing thing in the world, but if you didn't document it and you don't know how to reproduce it, then yay, you made that, and now what do you do? So it is very important to be, sanitation super important, documentation super important. So it really is one of those careers where you need to be well-rounded, and it really does help if you have both the creative side and some organizational, structural background as well, and to help kind of blend that together.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime, especially with whiskey, given the aging, anytime I even try to wrap my head around the people handling the inventories, it terrifies me that you've got to predict what you're going to be selling however many years from now when you're putting it into the barrel.
Decade.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So to just give you a little idea of size where we're at right now, we are sitting on just about 16,000 full-size whiskey barrels. So we're all 53-gallon barrels. That's all we work with here. And about a third of that, so probably right around 5,000, is whiskey that we've made here at our distillery in California over the last 8+ years. And then the rest is whiskeys that we've been collecting throughout the U.S., primarily Kentucky and Indiana. And yeah, so we've got, quite a bit of whiskey to play with. I mean, from a volume standpoint, that's well over 300,000 9-liter cases, 12 packs of whiskey that we get to play with. So Lauren and I have this amazing playground, so to speak, that we get to delve into, and all these different flavors, and this huge canvas that we get to work with when we're creating these blends. And at this point, really, for the core offering, the white label, we've already created these blends, and so now it's our goal to keep these consistent and to keep the quality as high as possible through time. And so that's something that we work on a regular basis.
Yeah. And then I apologize if you mentioned it already. When was that first release that was Lost Monarch but wasn't called it? What year was that?
That was 2017.
Okay.
And so, right around end of summer, early September 2017. And then that lived out in market for a couple of years. And then we did a big, the official launch of Redwood Empire with this current packaging in fall of 2019.
Okay. Yes. And the packaging actually brings me to my next point, because I've discussed on multiple occasions how whiskey really rides the line between the science and the art. You guys mentioned the sanitation, the organization, the keeping of the recipes, and there's also the blending, the using your palate to figure out what goes with what, the pairing, like you mentioned, Lauren, with chocolate and with beer and with spirits. So you really get both sides of it. And whether it's on purpose or not, I feel that your guys' labels really help encapsulate that. I always just thought all of the labels I've seen so far are pretty gorgeous. And I'm curious as to whether that's on purpose or not, or just in general, the story behind these very artistic labels that kind of pop, aside from, of course, there's a marketing aspect to it, but the story that led to that.
So Redwood Empire, if you come out here, if you've ever been out to our place in the world, we're an hour north of San Francisco, and the Redwood Empire actually is a real place. We kind of joke about it because everything out here is named Redwood Empire: the garbage company, the law office,
bank,
the banks, pet store, the food bank, whatever. But but it really is geographically a real place. It is the area north of San Francisco up to the Oregon border along the coast. And it's that coastal region where historically all the redwood trees grew. And a lot of them were logged out over the last several hundred years, but there are quite a few of them left. And we have an old growth forest just 20 minutes from the distillery. And I mean, we're talking massive trees, over 1,000 years old, over 300 feet tall, 20 feet in diameter, just massive, massive trees. And so, I mean, we really do love our trees. We're in Northern California. And so that's kind of where the idea for the branding story started. It was like, let's talk about our place in the world. For people outside of California, you don't really realize, but there's really two Californias. There's Northern California and Southern. There's the beach country and then the coastal kind of rugged outdoor country. And that's kind of more where we're at. We're, less than an hour from the Pacific Ocean, definitely more temperate. I mean, we do have our beaches, but they're cold. Like you wouldn't want to go in the water. It's 50 degrees. You'd have to wetsuit up. But so we're definitely more kind of that a little bit more rugged outdoorsy. So that's the brand overall. What we're trying to tap into is our place in the world. We are in Northern California.
And not shy away from the fact that we are making spirits in California, right? We mentioned a little bit before about like where the expectation is. I mean, oftentimes we'll run into people who say, oh, you can't make bourbon unless it's in Kentucky, right? We in this group all know that that's not true.
Not true.
But that's still a widely held belief and idea. And so I think part of this branding was really kind of owning the fact that we are separate from that, at least in some way. And then kind of embracing the art, majesty, majestic qualities of those trees and translating that through kind of technical distilling decisions. And hopefully having that same kind of awe-inspiring experiences you do when you're walking underneath those redwoods on your palate when you're tasting these whiskeys.
Well said.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Yeah, so Pipe Dream, Lost Monarch, Emerald Giant, these are actually living trees that are in forests in Northern California. And so they've been around for over 1,000 years. The latitude, longitude is on the bottle, so you can actually Google that and go to these trees. And so, again, bringing you right back to that sense of place. The imagery and the quotes is John Muir is our muse. So John Muir is the grandfather of the National Park System, Yosemite, and really the parks in general are here because of him. And so it's we're kind of paying homage to him, and because he's really the reason we still have these parks. And so there's kind of some fanciful likeness of him on some of our imagery, and there's quotes from him on each of our front labels.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't know that until I had started looking into your guys' company about these being trees. That's what the names are. If people are wondering, like, where do they get these wild names from? It's actual redwoods, which is really cool.
Yeah, and if you read the back label, which most people don't, but the back label does have 3 panels on it. It has a panel about the whiskey on the white labels on the core products, and then about the forest that the Pipe Dream's in, and then the individual Pipe Dream. So it gives you some details on 367 feet tall. It's in Redwood State Park. It's among the fastest growing trees ever measured. So just some fun stuff, kind of, again, bring you back to our geographic place in the world.
Yeah, that is fun. I always love when a whiskey has a story to it, whenever there's a little bit extra that you can read up on it. A lot of times I'll drink a glass and I'll be reading the label, be looking it up online, things like that. That always makes it a little bit more enjoyable. And so... Yeah,
so if we want to spend, a few minutes just talking about the individual whiskeys, I mean, this is your show. I'll let you guide it, but, happy to get into a little bit more details on these individual spirits.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have some notes written up on Grizzly Beast, which I'm drinking right now. I probably won't go nose palate finish for all of them quite yet, but I do want to kind of dive into Grizzly Beast, given that it's newer, and so far from my tastings I've done, I think it might be my favorite. But I'm gonna have to do more tastings, and I'm probably gonna be doing a video on that here soon, breaking down kind of all 5 of them. I love a lineup. I do that with Weller too, breaking down a lineup and the differences and things. So leading into the whiskeys, I did want to ask, I saw some things on your website about a custom built still. I wasn't sure if there's anything different about the still that you guys use, and if so, like what it is that's different about it, or if it was more so just custom built to fit your like location and your process, basically?
Well, I would consider every still to be custom built.
Yeah,
For
like,
sure.
it's like a hot rod or a car. Like everyone, they are all unique. I mean, for us that run them,
For sure. But our still is a head frame still, so they are a manufacturer out of Butte, Montana. And it is a continuous column still, but on a slightly smaller scale than some of like the larger companies like a Vendome or things like that. So it was a really great start for the company overall to kind of get foot in the door into making whiskey. We're at about 4 barrels if it's rye, 5 barrels of if it's bourbon a day, production wise. So it's definitely a workhorse for us, but we are looking to increase that capacity, right, Jeff?
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's a pretty typical classic column setup. So it's has 14 trays in it. It has a main stripping column. Ours does have a couple of vodka columns in the middle. We don't make a lot of vodka here internally, but it has the capability. And then I think where it really shines is it does have a finishing column, a smaller column that does a redistillation just for making that final heads cut. And so it does a really great job of allowing us to really dial in our flavors from that head standpoint. And it's been a lot of fun to run over the last 8 years. I know Lauren's enjoyed it. Lauren joined us from running a kind of a pot.
A Carl pot still, so yeah. Very different.
Very different setup. And so I love her opinion on things, and I love her feedback and her palate, because it's just very interesting to see the differences on pot versus column. I mean, for most of us, when you get to a certain size, it's pretty challenging to continue to run stuff on pots. They just are. There's some efficiencies that it's really hard to reproduce without a lot of copper. So we like our little column. As Lauren mentioned, we are looking to upsize that. Current column is 12 inches in diameter. We're looking to get a 24 inch. You double the diameter, you about double the height, and you about 9x your output. So it's a pretty big growth. Yeah. So that's our goal would be to get to that next level, hopefully over the next couple of years, where we can really start to lay down a ton more California whiskey.
Awesome. And so then all of your grain to glass selections that we're about to discuss here, those all come from that column still at this moment in time?
Correct.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So I do imagine you got quite a bit of the cleaning and the transfer over probably, huh? As you guys
especially
mentioned.
On the rye. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So to get to the whiskey lineup, this is what everybody came for, right? We can start to discuss the fun stuff here. So I started with Pipe Dream. That was the one that I went out and bought, and I'm not going to physically drink the 5 glasses at the moment, but I will be drinking the Grizzly Beast as we go here. But
Sure.
Pipe Dream, you guys mentioned it's your gateway drug selection, if you will. It's easy to drink, it's sweet, and it evokes close to what you might expect, what your Kentucky bourbon drinker might look for, but still seems to put a little bit of its own spin on it. For me, I thought it just had a really good, in the $40 range, which is what it is in Ohio, I expect a little bit of like a harshness left on my palate. I expect a little bit of kind of the funky type of char that you get sub $40 a lot of the time. It's not a rule, but it happens. And to me, it just came across clean, and it came across with more. It didn't lean into the wood in terms of the notes that I got as much as I would have anticipated. I got more of this kind of spicy sweetness from it that I don't have my notes in front of me on, but I really enjoyed. So I'll let you kind of take it from there. But what is, if you had to, in a couple sentences, say what is Pipe Dream? What does somebody expect from Pipe Dream? What would you say that is?
I think anytime you have bourbon on your label, you have to stay to the standard at the very least. And so the standard for me when I'm drinking or if I'm judging bourbon, it is that it does have that really pleasant sweetness, but even more important is the texture. So you have to have longevity on the palate and creaminess. And that has a lot to do with our blending process here. We are, as Jeff mentioned, very lucky that we have this incredible library of whiskey to pull from and to craft from. And so with that and as our arsenal, we can really execute very well on creating very well balanced products. So we can round out any of those harsh edges and really kind of make and achieve the flavors that we're wanting to in every whiskey, but in the pipe dream in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows the art of blending, because it's, this is bourbons from 4 states, probably 7 different distilleries, lots of different mash bills, ages anywhere from 4 years on the minimum all the way up to 14 years. So you have just this incredible complexity in all these components. But at the end of the day, what Laura and I share in common is we're all about balance and harmony, and maybe even a little restraint. I mean, we want things to have like a little bit of a delicacy to them, and to have you kind of peel back that onion and not get whacked in the face with a ton of wood right off the bat, right? Or a ton of tannins or some aggressive flavors. And I think this really does deliver on that, where you can just kind of slowly let it layer and open up over you. Having that older bourbon to work with really does help with that length, which I think is just it's hard to find, especially like you said at this price point, because it's just hard to you can't recreate that length with young bourbon. You have to, only age will get you that length on the palate. And so having all of this to play with really gets us there, which is just, again, a ton of fun.
Yeah, and so maybe that's my lack of knowledge there, unless I don't know if it was on the website or not, but for the pipe dream, what ages of bourbons are we looking at in that blend?
So 4-year minimum, that's what's on the label, because we're required by, we can only put the minimum, but we have up to 14-year working for us on that.
Oh, okay.
So it's probably, averages. There's a lot of 6 and 8-year-old in there as well. So just as we get older, we're putting older stuff in our blends, right?
Yeah, that does explain a little bit for me, though, that length, that kind of roundness that you both mentioned. It doesn't have that as much of that young, kind of just burn, kind of that the tannic without the sweetness that you get with the age. And that actually explains, I had no idea that it was that old, because as you mentioned, age statements always have to be the minimum barrel that goes into the bottle. So that's very good to know.
Yeah.
So then moving into Lost Monarch. Now this, I went a little bit backwards. I'm going in the order that I had them. But Lost Monarch being what you had originally released, what Redwood originally released. You've got a blend of bourbon and rye, which, if I'm not mistaken, which really brings some playful balance there, where you're getting that spice of the rye, you're getting that sweetness of the bourbon, and you're also getting whatever strange kind of characteristics pop out of the interplay between those two. Was there a specific flavor you were going for when that was originally distilled, or originally blended, I should say?
I mean, I love rye. So when they said, okay, in 2017, you get to make one whiskey, I was like, let's do something that has rye as the forward characteristic. So this is about 60% rye in the blend, and then 40% bourbon. But there's enough of that bourbon to where it does round that out. And I think as you said, and that was really well said. In the interplay that you take two components, you put them together, and you get something totally new. And I think that this is really fun to taste people blind on, because it's a lot of that. What is it? Is it a rye? Is it a bourbon? Is it a Kentucky? There's some Kentucky ryes out there that have a lot of bourbon in them. And then there are some bourbons that are really high rye, and it's neither, but it has some of those qualities of both. And so I think it's super fun. I mean, the ryes are younger, so you're getting your youthfulness from that and the spice, but there's just enough of that bourbon in there to really round it out. And I like this. I think this is like our entry for rye drinkers. Like, you're getting more and more people interested in coming to the rye party. And like, this is this is how you get in. Like, this is how you kind of start to explore that rye universe without getting totally knocked off your feet with a 95.5 out of the gate. So yeah, I think it's just super fun.
I mean, American whiskey is having a bit of a moment right now. And by American whiskey, I mean whiskeys that don't necessarily fall into the spirit category type of bourbon or rye, like blended whiskeys and things like that. There's a lot of distilleries and brands out there doing some really fun things and kind of revitalizing the I guess I would say the reputation of blended whiskeys. I think that it's had kind of a negative connotation for a while. And so I'm happy to see some of the really fun things that are kind of coming out right now. And also it's just incredibly versatile as a spirit, both, sipping, of course, but for cocktails, it just really kind of provides a really wide range of ability when mixing.
Yeah, I always tell people if they're going to have one of these three in their back bar at home, like Lost Monarch's the one to have. Or if you're going to a party, you want to bring a good party whiskey, like, it is super versatile. Like, people will drink it neat, they'll be happy with it, but you can also cocktail it all day long, and it's just super fun.
Yeah, it's versatile, and I would add in it's not going to be very similar to the other stuff you've already got behind your bar. If you've got your bourbon and you've got your rye, it's like you said, if you do this in a blind tasting, it's like, what am I tasting right now? It's really got that unique characteristic to it. That I haven't tried it in any cocktails. I might have to give that a try. Do you have a recommendation for a specific one you guys like with it?
I mean, I like all the classics,
I mean, we're pretty spirit forward in the cocktail category, so it sounds boring, but like Manhattans and old fashions. I love a good highball, and out of the three, I choose the Lost Monarch for that.
Yeah, because that again is you're elevating the spirit, and it does really play well with that. I like a good paper plane. I'll do that with just about anything, but it's fun with the Lost Monarch too.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you've got the Lost Monarch. Like you said, it's a great entry into rye. You get to kind of understand that character that rye brings to a whiskey. And from there you can step to Emerald Giant, which is a rye. Is it 100% rye blended?
I mean, it is a rye whiskey, so yeah, it is all rye whiskeys in the blend. And so It's a blend of predominantly 95% rye, 5% malt barley.
Okay.
And then there's some 90% malt barley, 5% wheat. We love our wheat here at the distillery here in Grayton, so we put wheat in both our bourbons and our ryes that we make here in-house. Pretty much all our recipes have some component of wheat in them. So it has a touch of wheat from us. And then we also were playing with some more malt on some of the other mash bills as well. So since it's a blend, again, it allows us to play with some different components to take a little bit of a detour from your kind of classic 95.5 spice box. So I think it's got a lot of that in it. You smell it and the roots are there, and you know what there's no mistaking what this is when you nose it and you get into it. But I like to think that we do kind of give it a little twist with what we're adding to it from both our stocks and also the blending components.
It's certainly savory, but it isn't harsh. I think that is one of the things that can distance people from rye, unfortunately, is that it can be harsh in your mouth, on your palate, just like overall too much. And so I think this is where some of that finesse and restraint that both Jeff and I like to exercise comes into play. It is a much more approachable, easy drinking rye without losing the heart of what that spirit is.
Yeah. I think I see that in a lot of the lineup that I have tried so far, is that I feel like each one that I've had so far, we talked about the Pipe Dream with having the older bourbons in it that gives it this characteristic you don't really expect at $40. I think everything that I've had so far from your lineup has something that stands out that makes it a little bit different. And I think for the Emerald Giant, that would probably be, it would be that, I don't want to say smoothness. Smoothness gets overused a lot, but it is a more approachable, but somehow still brings the very rye forward flavor. It's almost a little bit herbal, a little bit of spice. And so I'm less versed in the Emerald Giant and in the Rocket Top. I'm still working on those, but I have tried them a couple times. And I like to get a little farther down in a bottle before I give a full opinion. But so far, I can say that they stand out a little bit, and I really enjoy that. Which would lead me to the next one. That would be Rocket Top. And this is a bottled in bond rye, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mm-hmm. So this is 100% in-house made spirit. And we're doing 5 years on the age. And the second batch of the Rocket Top is my favorite thing that we've put out. It's a 4-grain rye, so there is a little bit of corn in there, and then wheat, of course, malted barley, and predominant is rye. But there's just a little bit of that corn in there that gives it a little bit more longevity on the palate than rye tends to have. Sometimes the rye can lift too quickly, and that's what gives it that tingling sensation on your palate, is it just evaporates kind of like right in the middle of you enjoying it. And so this gives it just a little added weight there to kind of hold it in place so you really get the full effect of the flavor that's going on. And then I love like sage, I love tobacco, I love super herbal and savory flavors just overall. And so I kind of liken this in particular to like a Ricola. It has some of that kind of medicinal sweetness to it that I really love.
Lauren loves her aquavits. She
I
loves
do.
her crazy liqueurs.
That's a good
all it.
descriptor though. The herbal forward notes are definitely there. I don't know my herbs very well because I don't have to when I do bourbon reviews. It's caramel and cinnamon, but sage really, I was like, oh, that you're absolutely right. It's got that herb forward palate to it.
Yeah, I mean, so you start distilling and you start putting stuff in barrels, and then you visit them often, and then you stop visiting them as often because you start to realize that it's a long game. And it's kind of depressing, like, quite frankly, early on, because you're like, man, when are these things ever going to be ready? And so that was the first couple of years for us. But then you get to that point where, like, you get into, like, year 3 or year 4, and you're starting to taste them, and you're like, okay, all right, they're coming back. They're coming around. Like, and so for us, like, it is a pretty magical time because, I mean, the first 3 we talked about, that's the art of blending. It is an amazing art. It's super fun. There's a lot of amazing people in the world that do that for a living. But this is, kind of the opposite of that. This is what we did at a certain point in time in the distillery, especially with bottle and bond. You're only allowed to commingle in a 6-month window. So this is all, in the case of batch 2, it's all spring of 2017. So this is it almost kind of lays you naked as a distiller. It's like, this is what we were doing at this point in time in the distillery. Love it or hate it, this is who we are. And so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but it's a pretty fun and gratifying moment to be able to get your products to market from that standpoint as well, because it really does show the evolution of a distillery. So I'm really looking forward to seeing from this craft distilling movement, seeing all of us mature over time and seeing the offerings that we all continue to put out year after year of our bottle and bond or our 100% grain glass or whatever we're calling it. But just watching us all evolve over time, because it's just a really fun thing to see over time.
Yes, as someone whose podcast is really riding the wave of that excitement, I can say I very much am enjoying it as well. We're going through such a renaissance right now.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. When I think about it too much, it stresses me out. Is cracking open those barrels after you're like, okay, we think it's been aged long enough. Let's see what we've got. There's some monitoring throughout the process, but
right. There's quite a bit of monitoring.
Yeah. Yeah. But then sitting down and saying, okay, what do we think we have? This is a question I've always wanted to ask. I'm sure there's people who are listening who want to know. The image of what you're going for in your head when you write the recipe, when you distill it originally, you throw it into barrels. How would you compare that to the image that you get when you go to try it? Do you go in with certain expectations, or is it kind of like, I think this combination is going to taste good, let's see what it tastes like on the other side?
It's a good question. I mean, the runway is so long that I honestly couldn't tell you what I was thinking in spring of 17 when I mashed this. I mean, I think I had some ideas. I mean, again, we're looking for complexity always. So our mash bills are always going to be, at least 3 grain, a lot of times 4 grain, playing with different barrel treatments. We have a lot of different cooperages we've played with in different char levels. And so, we're just trying to tease out complexity through flavors. So, I mean, I think broadly was what, I was looking for, but like directionally, I don't know. I mean, it's like, you open it up and you hope it's good.
Yep.
I feel like this point in our careers, like we know a little bit better what to expect based off of the decisions that we're making at the start of the process.
You're just crushing my modesty.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like starting, certainly, all you have to go on is other people's product, right? And so you're like tasting through other people's product, tasting through and trying to find out as much as you can process-wise when you are figuring it out for yourself. But I think at this stage, I mean, we've certainly started making some adjustments to our overall mash bills. And one of the biggest adjustments is just overall diversity of what we're doing, because we are so focused and really enjoying the blending aspect of what we do. So we do an incredible variety of mash bills in-house, and that's what we are pulling from for the core, but also for the grain to glass offerings as well. But in terms of for like the idea, the concept for blending, I personally always I have to have a strong vision that I'm working towards when we're doing it. And then that helps with the decision-making process. So we just started today going through barrels for batch 3 of the bottled and bond. And a lot of that is done via nose. I'd say the first yes or no comes on the nose, and then the second is flavor profile, and then third is overall blending balance.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, you're kind of getting both in that regard, that you're putting these mash bills out like, I hope this one goes this direction, I hope this goes this direction, and then blending them together and then you can really dial it in from there. You kind of got your coarse adjustment in your mash bill and your fine adjustment in the blending, if that's fair to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very fair. Yeah.
And we have been visiting these throughout the course of their life. So we have, by the time they get to definitely 4 years, we have a pretty good idea where they're going to be at. And so it's not like we're going into this blind. You know, most whiskeys have this awkward teenager phase where they're a couple of years in and you're just like, I don't know if that's ever going to be okay. And then they come out of that, and they all come out of it at different. It's not like it happens magically at 3.5 years for everything, or 4 or whatever. I mean, it just really depends upon where you're at, how you made it, what you're aging it in, a lot of different factors. And so, but we've been doing this long enough that we have a pretty good idea when things are starting to come out of that phase, and we've been visiting them. So yeah, I mean, it's a super fun process. It's a labor of love. I mean, like Lauren said, we have the Grizzly Beast. We have, almost 200 barrels that we have to pare down, to I think around 100. And so it's going through that process, and you don't want to pick all the best ones. You don't want to pick all the most interesting ones. You want to kind of try to straddle this line where you're thinking about the holistic blend and how that's going to play. And so you're trying to, pick these flavor notes out and think about how they're going to interact together.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want it to be greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah, that's really the trick with blending. I've discussed that a couple times on this show. Is everybody loves to talk about the honey barrels. There's a barrel and it's just the best thing you've ever tasted. But unless you're selling nothing but single barrels, you're not going to just sell that honey barrel. You've got to find a way to mix it in with the barrel that, maybe this one had too much bitterness. And that's really the art of blending a blend such as like Grizzly Beast, which is a great segue. Let's talk about Grizzly Beast, because that's what I'm drinking at the moment. So far, this might be my favorite. I loved Pipe Dream, as I've mentioned on multiple occasions, and I thought the only thing that might make this better is if it just had a little bit more kick to it, maybe a little bit more proof, maybe a little bit more spice. And then you guys sent me a bottle of Grizzly Beast, and I was like, all right. I thought it brought the brown sugary sweetness, and it delivers that, and then it hits you with that spiciness. You've got some fruitiness that reminds me of like cherries. And I love when different profiles are kind of delivered at different times. It's one of those things that you're not just hit with everything right up front. What am I interpreting? But you've kind of got this spiciness, this sweetness, and it deepens into that darker brown sugar, which I really enjoy. And I did later on, I wrote down my notes that I get from it, and I did later on look up the notes that Redwood Empire suggests, or what is considered to be the profile of the whiskey. And I loved molasses. I was saying brown sugar, molasses, a little bit darker. It kind of deepens on your palate as you're drinking it, and I really enjoy that about it.
Yeah.
I love the red fruit on this batch too, in particular. Like you were saying, the fruits on it are just, like raspberries. I mean, there's definitely some stewed fruit, but there's also some just super bright fruits as well. And it's just, this one's been very fun.
I find that those often are coming from, the grain and the fermentation side of things. And that's why I really love bourbon that's kind of right between like a 4 to 7 year old is kind of like my sweet spot age-wise when it comes to bourbon. Otherwise, it tends to go a little bit heavier into the barrel flavor, which, is enjoyable and great. But I like some of the tartness, some of the acidity, some of that brighter flavor that kind of makes it pop a little bit differently on your palate. It's not just all, cream and oak and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and this batch is 23% rye. So there's a pretty significant amount of rye in it. And then 7% wheat and 4% barley. So, but I like the way the rye plays in this, where it's just, it's there, it's creating that note. You are getting some of those herbal characteristics and some spice, but it is still pretty darn drinkable for 100 proof. And it's just got some nice smoothness to it.
Yeah, and I think that's you kind of check a few boxes there. With, as I mentioned, I'm really enjoying the Grizzly Beast so far, and it checks a few boxes for me, where a lot of times you might get a lot of sweet. Maybe you just have a welcoming bourbon. You might get a lot of spice. Maybe you've got a really punchy, exciting bourbon. You might get sweet with some spice, sweet with some fruit with some spice. I feel that this palate, for me personally at least, really has a nice transition of all three. I sometimes I'll get some sips. I'll be like, oh, this is more spicy. Some sips, I really get that molasses. After I read it, it was like it clicked in my mind, that deepness. And then some sips, it is just straight fruit. It's so bright. For me, it's cherries. I get that sort of cherry, especially on the nose, mixed in with that cinnamon that almost is like a cherry pie type of flavor. And I really enjoy that.
It's a fun spirit. I think palate evolution is the key to kind of creating excellent spirits, right? Something that you can sit with, something that evolves not only in the glass, but also on your palate, because it wants to continuously engage you. You want to keep going back for more because there's potentially another surprise around the corner waiting for you.
Yeah, so this is batch 2. We launched this last fall. The goal for us is to have a bottle and bond release once a year, somewhere in the early fall, late summer. And so, like Lauren said, we're starting to blend together batch 3 right now, and we'll slowly grow these over time. I mean, sadly, we have our still, and it only makes so much whiskey, and that all is precious for us, and we have many uses for it. So these will never be huge and super widely available, but the goal is to get them a little bit more widely available each year. And so we're launching, this, and then we have a couple other products as well that we're slowly getting to market. So we're excited to continue to grow our portfolio.
Yeah, that brings me to my couple of last questions that I had for you guys. Is there anything specific coming up that you want to mention or reveal, or even for those who haven't seen the Grizzly Beast and the Rocket Top? I think they know about it now. But is there anything going on specifically you want to mention?
Well, funny you should mention it.
Yeah, funny you should mention it. We had our first release for cask strength towards the end of last year, kind of like mid-fall, right? And so we're going to be doing another release. It was very widely appreciated, which we love because, cask strength for us is the way to go. So the cask strength we're going to be releasing again. That'll be the soonest thing to release in the near future. And those are for each one of these 3 core SKUs.
Yeah, so it's essentially the exact same recipe as the Pipe Dream, the Lost Monarch, and the Emerald Giant without the water added. So you can do that at your leisure to whatever amount you want, or none at all.
Yeah.
And so we've been wanting to do that for a while here, because when we're making these blends, we're making them all at cask strength, and they are pretty darn delicious at cask strength. So we finally got approval for that last year, and so that'll hopefully be something that'll start to kind of get into the rotation a little bit more as we get through time. And then this fall, we're planning to do some new releases we're going to do a wheated bourbon, a high rye bourbon, and then our first single malt release, which will be super fun as well. So those are all going to be things. They're going to be pretty small, so you'll get a little bit in Ohio, probably not a lot, but they'll be available a little bit online too. We have great partnerships with distributors, so we're probably more geared towards traditional distribution versus doing a ton of stuff online. But we do some stuff online as well, so those will be fun things to look forward to in the probably starting September, October timeframe.
Okay, that's very exciting. Yeah, do me a favor, make sure some of that cask strength pipe dream makes its way to Ohio in some trucks. That way I can find it at my brick and mortar, because that
we can work on it.
Cask strength is obviously not just a trend right now, but it's very appreciated when you're looking for something for a little bit more kick. Like you said, dilute it yourself, whatever strength you want. That's always great.
Yeah, it puts the power in your hands.
And ours are a little bit, again, more restrained. We're around 117 proof. We're not chasing proof here, so that's just kind of how things work out based on our entry proof of our barrels, which is typically around 110, and some of our other components that we're bringing out west. So we're right around that 117, which I think for cask is kind of that great sweet spot where it's still a lot of alcohol in your glass, but it's not 130, 135. It's not going to completely wreck you. So it's a nice kind of in between.
Yes, absolutely. I find that for me, right around the 115 mark is where I really enjoy when I'm looking for something that's going to kick me a little more. The 115 mark is always pretty great. You get up. I'm not into the hazmat quite yet. The hazmat stuff up over one. Not yet. So to finish things up here, I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me. This has been super informative. Definitely a lot of fun for a whiskey nerd like myself. Is there, everybody would love to have just record-breaking sales. That's one goal that anybody could have. But what mark do you guys think you would want to leave on the whiskey industry specifically? I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit. What would you want to be, the Redwood Empire legacy, if you will, moving forward into the next decades?
I mean, I'll go first. I'm sure we have different thoughts on that. But, in general, for me, I think it's fun to put California whiskey on the map, but not just California whiskey, but to show the geographical differences, and that's okay. I mean, you're seeing this movement in Texas right now. You're seeing in the Northwest, you're seeing a whiskey movement. I think it's just to get those preconceived notions out of people's minds and get people more adventurous and willing to try different spirits, even outside of whiskey, from different places, and to kind of break down those walls a little bit. So that would be the one thing that I'm excited. I'm hopeful that we can help continue to kind of bring light to this movement of, hey, you can make really good whiskey in a place you never thought you could.
Oh my goodness. Gosh, so many marks that I want to make. I think one of the biggest ones that I would like to see is kind of the expansion into other types of grains, and but using them in cooperation with some of what we already have going to kind of showcase them in different ways. Triticale is one that I really love and enjoy working with. Spelt as well. Is a really beautiful grain to be working with, and so obviously we all love corn, and some of us love rye, me included. But I want to kind of showcase some of the other raw materials out there and really what they have to offer in terms of complexity and flavor depth.
Okay, yeah. So I think in both cases, you've got branching things out a little bit more, pushing that envelope as to what we're seeing right now versus what we should be seeing here in the next decade or so.
Yep, not your grandfather's whiskey.
Yeah, and I don't have any complaints about that. I don't think there's any chance that I'm going to be bored with the whiskey podcast in the next decade. I don't see that. I don't see the industry slowing down very much.
Yeah, certainly not the passion for it.
Definitely. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me. That's all that I had for my specific questions. And I really just appreciate the in-depth discussion about your process, what you've got going on, and of course the whiskey lineup. Like I said, I love to hear the stories behind whiskey. I know a lot of my listeners do as well, and it really helps when you can kind of peel back that curtain and learn a little bit about the whiskeys that you're drinking. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Do you have any closing comments that you'd like to share?
I don't think so. I mean, we really appreciate the time that you've given us today, and great questions. You definitely know your stuff, so it's always fun to chat with somebody that appreciates the craft.
Yeah, I'm not drinking in February except for work, so I especially appreciate this opportunity.
Anytime.
So thank you.
That's great. Well, it's been a pleasure, guys. So enjoy the rest of your evening. It's a little bit earlier there for you than it is for me, but enjoy the rest of your day.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Whiskey Noobs. If you like the show, please make sure to leave a 5-star rating or review to help grow the show and get the word out. You can also find more Whiskey Noobs content on Instagram at whiskey_noobs and on TikTok at Whiskey Noobs Podcast. If you want to drink right along with me, make sure to join the email list by sending an email to whiskeynoobspodcast@gmail.com with a subject line saying email list. You will receive monthly emails with a list of the whiskeys that will be featured throughout the month so that you can buy them ahead of time and drink right along with the show. Once again, thanks for listening to this episode. The Whiskey Noobs Podcast does not support underage or otherwise irresponsible consumption of alcohol.